Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for joining us on this Friday, August 28th, coming to you live from our studio in Seoul. I'm Shin Se-min. Before we begin, these are the stories we're following at the top of the hour. South Korea extends the level 2 social distancing guidelines by another week and takes a wait-and-see approach rather than raising the distancing measures further. The country in the past 2 weeks has been seeing day after day of new COVID-19 cases in the triple digits. The doctors' nationwide strike enters its last day. Thousands of trainee doctors in a collective action will be turning off their mobile phones for the day, raising their voice one last time against the government's move to up the number of medical students. On the last day of the Republican National Convention, U.S. President Donald Trump will be accepting his nomination for the presidency. And with that, the race to the White House is officially on. Our top story this morning, South Korea is extending its level 2 social distancing measures by another week as local authorities are scrambling to get the resurgence of COVID-19 under control. Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun said this morning that the government wants to avoid raising the level a notch to the highest level if it can. Listen to this.
Level 3 social distancing measures are the last bastion we have considering the economic and social ripple effect it could have. Stricter quarantine measures will mean much harsher difficulties in our daily lives, but ask you for your cooperation.
Now that means the rest of the nation, including the Seoul metropolitan region, will be maintaining level 2 distancing measures. The government will also be discussing measures to limit the operation and opening hours of restaurants and cafes. And we will be sure to bring you any updates to that in our later newscast. Local health authorities here in South Korea are facing difficulty in tracking COVID-19 transmissions as cluster infections continue to spread fast. For more on the recent spread of the virus, our Han Sung-woo tells us more.
COVID-19 is showing new patterns of transmission. One recent source is an apartment complex in Seoul's Gurogu district, responsible for at least 32 infections as of Thursday evening. What's startling is that the initial cluster of 8 cases were not from a single household, or even the same floor. Rather, they were from 5 different households on 5 different floors. Along with the building's elevator, the ventilating system had previously been suspected as a possible transmission route, as those apartments are all located directly below each other. Despite the concerns, health authorities and experts had largely ruled out such a possibility.
Ventilating systems could be another source, given the possibility of aerosol infection, but we can't be sure about that as air is not the major method of transmission.
And their suspicions were correct. After reviewing 14 different samples, Guro District confirmed Thursday evening that the ventilating system was not to blame. These kinds of cluster infections have surged drastically over the past few weeks, with a new list of COVID-19 hotspots, including a meat factory where one of the infected apartment residents work. But it is highly unlikely that the virus has mutated to contribute to this current spike, given that the prominent variant found now and several months ago are the same, both the GH variant.
Even when the situation was relatively under control, transmissions continued quietly via asymptomatic patients or those with mild symptoms. But as social distancing was loosened and with people engaging in social activities, it became an environment where transmissions occurred more easily.
He added that tracing the sources of these fast-spreading transmissions is very difficult and wouldn't help contain the outbreak either. It seems only stronger social distancing measures can prevent the situation from getting any worse. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Despite the mandatory return to work order issued by the South Korean government on all striking trainee doctors, they still remain adamant in their demands to scrap planned healthcare reforms. Also on this, related government agencies and the police are believed to be holding a comprehensive briefing at this hour, and they could be coming up with a strong response to the doctors' collective action. Our Kim Hyo-sun explains.
76% of South Korea's trainee doctors have stated they are willing to submit letters of resignation as they continue their walkout protesting the government's medical reform plan. The Korean Inter-Resident Association says thousands of trainee doctors will partake in a collective action to turn their mobile phones off for the entire day Friday. All trainee doctors at the emergency department of Severance Hospital in Sinchon, Seoul have already submitted letters of resignation. Some 800 trainee doctors at 5 big hospitals in Daegu area say they will do the same. They explain they will not respond to the return to work order issued by the government, which has even warned of possible jail terms, as such collective action causes major difficulties, especially when the country is facing a nationwide COVID-19 outbreak. The association remained adamant, explaining that if a single trainee doctor in the country faces damages, the medical sector will lose some 16,000 interns and resident doctors. The government's stance also remains unchanged. Seoul's health minister sat down with the heads of the country's major university hospitals, stressing the government's utmost priority is protecting the lives and safety of the public.
I cannot understand the decision taken by the doctors. To this, the government had no other choice but to take the legal action, including a return to work order, to ensure it does not threaten the public's lives and safety.
The government, however, has withdrawn its plan to report these medical practitioners to the police late Friday afternoon after threatening them that they could be charged if they continue to strike. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., the race to the White House is officially on. U.S. President Donald Trump is due to give his acceptance speech for the Republican ticket for the 2020 election from the White House lawn at any moment. Senior advisor and also the first daughter, Ivanka Trump, will be introducing her father on the final night of the Republican National Convention, which just began at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. President Trump and his VP Mike Pence will be facing Democratic nominee Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the November 3rd election, and some Americans are already expecting to receive their ballots as early as next week. Hours before Trump takes to the stage, Biden claimed that President Trump and his allies are, quote, rooting for violence in the streets to drive fear for their own political gain. The latest data on the U.S. economy shows the worst quarterly drop on record in the second quarter, as its GDP from April to June period plunged more than 30% on an annualized basis. And the Federal Reserve has also rolled out a sweeping rewrite of its approach to monetary policy, putting new emphasis on bolstering the labor market and less on inflation. Lee Seung-jae reports.
According to the U.S. Commerce Department's second reading of the U.S. economy in the second quarter, the nation's GDP plummeted a record 31.7% on an annualized basis. The announcement on Thursday was revised down from the 32.9% initial estimate. Even with the better-than-expected revision, it's still the worst ever economic contraction in U.S. history. The drop was also more than 3 times the previous all-time decline of 10% in 1947. Many expected such negative data as last quarter, businesses shuttered and millions of workers lost their jobs as the world's largest economy went into lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The U.S. economy dropped an annualized 5% in the first 3 months of the year before the COVID-19 outbreak began to make its presence felt in the U.S. in February and March. This comes as the U.S. Federal Reserve announced a major policy shift on Thursday, saying it is willing to allow inflation to run above its goal of 2% for some time. The strategy suggests the Fed's key overnight interest rate, which is already at near zero, will stay there for potentially years to come as policymakers shift their stance regarding higher inflation. The Fed will instead focus more on bolstering the U.S. labor market. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said that despite a lot of strength in the economy, the job recovery faced a long tail of a couple of years as millions of American workers have been displaced from restaurant, travel, and similar jobs and will struggle to find new employment and will need steady support from the government. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper says Washington continues to pursue North Korea's complete and verifiable denuclearization. Now, his remarks follow speculation that there can be another Kim-Trump summit before the U.S. election in November, but some experts see little possibility of that happening. Our Yoon Jung-min tells us more.
Despite its stalled talks with North Korea, the United States says it continues to pursue the regime's complete and verifiable denuclearization. According to Reuters, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper said at an event in Hawaii on Wednesday that the U.S. has a responsibility to maintain a state of readiness against North Korea, but added diplomacy is the way to go in resolving the standoff with Pyongyang. His remarks come amid speculation Washington may be looking to hold talks with the regime before the U.S. presidential election in November.
We have a responsibility, working alongside our partners in the Republic of Korea, to maintain a readiness, a preparedness stance, the fight tonight capability. But diplomacy is the way to go, and we need to continue to pursue that goal.
Some pundits, however, say there is little possibility of talks before the presidential election this year. Speaking in a webinar hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, former U.S. intelligence officer for North Korea, Marcus Garluskas, said a meaningful summit is off the table prior to the election, adding there would have to be too much of a shift by one side or the other. The expert also raised a possibility of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un pushing ahead with an ICBM launch, nuclear test, or a new strategic weapon, citing Kim's announcement early this year that he was no longer bound by his pledges to refrain from ICBM and nuclear testing. Korea chair at CSIS Victor Cha, who also attended the webinar, said the North might resume its provocations to shape the North Korea policy by a new U.S. administration. On a possible October surprise, however, Cha did not rule out the possibility of another Kim-Trump summit, saying he still thinks anything is possible with the two leaders. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The U.S. Department of Defense is calling China's recent military exercises around the Paracel Islands in the South China Sea, quote, counterproductive, and is urging Beijing to stop aggravating tensions in that region. The statement on Thursday comes just a day after the U.S. imposed fresh new sanctions on Chinese state-owned enterprises and individuals accused of supporting the militarization and reclamation of the South China Sea. Earlier this week, China fired 2 missiles into the disputed waters in response to a U.S. spy plane flying over the area.
Good morning. Rain in the capital region has been stopped, but the south coast and Jeju could see up to 80 millimeters through tomorrow. Meanwhile, the rest of us will be under murky skies with a chance of passing rain during the day, so have an umbrella with you. Regarding the heat, it continues with heat wave alerts in place across much of the country. We'll see highs in the 30s, and Daegu is under a heat wave warning with an expected high of 34 degrees Celsius, and unbearable heat continues in Gangneung as well. We'll see sultry weather for most parts, and Seoul and Busan will be rising to 30 degrees Celsius this afternoon, and we could see some glints of sunshine. Looking ahead, rain is in store early this Sunday and nationwide showers mid-next week. And that band of rain will bring cooler conditions to the country. So we'll be able to feel a little more comfortable conditions by the end of next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Before we go, we just learned moments ago from the local authorities that South Korea added a new 371 COVID-19 cases on Thursday alone, which is below the 400-some mark, which recorded the day before, but definitely a staggeringly high number, worrying authorities here in South Korea. And that wraps it up for this edition of Arirang News. And as of today, I also wrap up by night my time working for Arirang TV. Now, the past 9 years, I have worked as an associate producer, reporter, and anchor. Have been an amazing privilege, an honor, and a great joy. I'd like to thank every member of our incredible news team, and of course, a huge thank you to you and to our viewers and for your support. It means more to me than you know. But Arirang News will be back with more of the day's headlines coming up at noon Korea time with Mark Broom, so do stay close. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.